Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this Honda EU2000i. This one was dropped off by Jason. He's a local guy who buys and sells equipment, and he also has access to stuff that people have thrown away. And believe it or not, someone threw away this machine. I'd like to think there's something seriously wrong with it, otherwise it wouldn't have been trashed. That said, Hondas, they are fairly bulletproof. And looking at this machine, at least from the outside, it seems to be complete and doesn't look like it's had a tough life. So I give this one a decent chance of coming back. Anyway, the only thing I was told is that, Jason did pull the machine over, the engine spins, but the compression did not feel good to him. Also, it is leaking oil, which is why it's in this box. So I say we get it out of the box, we'll get the access panel off, take a look inside, see what we see, and go from there. And there's a look at how much oil is leaked out in the few days it's been sitting here. So, I wouldn't say that's a ton of oil. And quite honestly, I'm not overly concerned about it because if you've ever changed the oil in an inverter generator, it can be a pretty messy process. And a lot of times the oil ends up going down into the clamshell instead of coming out like it's supposed to. And of course, the oil fill is right in this corner, and that's where we have the oil leaking out. So hopefully it's something as simple as a messy oil change. And this cover's already loose. So someone definitely had this off recently. The engine's also in the on position. So I'd say someone was trying to start it. So it actually doesn't look too bad in here. Let me show you. Yeah, it's really not that bad in here. I've seen quite a bit worse on inverters. I mean, there is some oil down there for sure, but nothing too concerning. And that there is the oil fill, and you can see there's actually an active drip of oil right there, so maybe it's just coming out of there. This might be overfilled, or maybe the cap's loose. So let's get the dipstick out, take a look, see what we have for oil. Yeah, the cap was on there pretty good. I wouldn't say it was loose. Oh, you know what? There's just way too much oil in there. So that's, I would say, the issue. There is a seal on this oil dipstick, so usually it can hold the oil back when it's splashing around in the engine. But when the engine's off, and if the oil level is above the level of the dipstick, like it is now, it is going to slowly leak. So, yeah, we need to get that level down a bit. I guess the good news is the oil looks brand new. So I'm just going to tip this back. We'll take the dipstick off again. And I have a pump for extracting oil. So what I'm going to do is just put that in like that. We'll pump it a few times and suck some of that oil out. Yeah, it's really overfilled. That level is pretty good. So we have plenty of oil. It's nice and clean. I did hear fuel in that tank when I lifted it up. So, let's just get the cover off the air box real quick, make sure we have an air filter, and we'll try to start it. Yeah. Looks nice and clean in here. Those filters are in good condition. So I think we'll give the cord a few pulls and watch. It just starts. All right, the tank vent is open. Eco switch is off. Ignition's already turned on and the choke's already on. And you can see the rope is a little bit frayed. You know, that's usually a pretty good indication that someone's been pulling this quite a bit, trying to get it to start. So let's pull it a few times ourselves. And yeah, no signs of life. I guess on the bright side, when I pull the engine over, there is a well-defined compression stroke. And when you hit compression, the engine stops and holds that compression pretty well. So the leak down is minimal. So I would say we have a good engine. You know, most likely it's a fuel issue, potentially spark. But I say we find out the easy way. Let's get the filter off, spray a little starting fluid in there, and see if this thing shows any signs of life. Yeah, this one's going to be a little hard actually to do this because of the way that this airbox is. It's offset quite a bit, so when I spray, it's only going to spray right here. It's actually not going to go in the throat of the carb, and it may not be enough for this engine to do anything. So I'm actually going to open the choke. Nice. Amazing. Who would throw away a machine like this, or any machine, you know, especially a Honda? I mean, these are $1,000 brand new. And like I said in the beginning, they're fairly bulletproof, and this one is no exception. The engine sounds fine. We know we have spark, compression, timing. We don't have fuel. The good news is I did see the inverter light turn on just for a second, so I think we have everything we need for a viable machine. We just need fuel. So let's get that carburetor off. We'll get it opened up and clean it up. Actually, before I pull that carburetor off, let's just check out the fuel situation. I definitely heard fuel in there, but I'd feel better if I actually looked before tearing into that carb. So we'll get this filter out if I can, and the cap. And we'll just drain out what's in there. It should be drained anyway. If the carb is gummed up, then chances are the fuel is not in very good shape. Yeah, and that looks terrible, actually. I think there's a ton of water in there. So the carb may actually not be clogged. If there's water in that bowl, there's no way it's going to start. The water cannot be pulled through the jets. And I would say there is a significant amount of water in here. So let's get the tank fully drained. We'll crack the drain on the bowl, get everything out of the system, and we'll try to start this again. Yep, that's about it. When the fuel is hazy like this, it's an indication usually that there's water in it. And if you're not sure, just let it sit for a day or so and see if this clears up and any water precipitate out. You know, in this case, we know there's water because if you look at the bottom here, you can actually see that water line. There's a ton of water in this fuel. And like I said, if we give it another day, this will clear up. And actually the good fuel will go to the top and the water will go to the bottom. So we can actually pour out the good fuel and reuse it, and then just dispose of the water. Anyway, there is still water in the system. You know, I couldn't drain the tank completely with that siphon. We also have a fuel pump, which I'm sure has water, and the carburetor as well. So I'm going to crack the drain on the carburetor. We'll put the cup underneath to catch the fuel and just pull the engine over. Try to get everything out of the system that we can, and then we'll put some fresh fuel in and try to start it again. So Honda does have a nice little tube here on the bottom of the carb for draining it. So we'll just crack that bolt loose. And we do have some fuel coming down. It looks pretty yellow and thick. No water though, but definitely not good fuel. So I'm going to leave that open, and yeah, I guess we can pull the engine, like I said earlier, and try to use the fuel pump, which is actually right on the back side here, to drain the rest of that tank. But what I'm wondering now actually is, you know, if I pull the line on the side of the carburetor and just extend it down, will the tank siphon dry through the fuel pump? Because if it can do that, then we can get the tank completely dry. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. I mean, most likely we're going to have to clean the carb anyway. So let's take the airbox off. We'll gain access to the fuel line. We'll get that off the carburetor and just extend it down and try to siphon out what's left in the system. So we have a total of 3 bolts. One of them is right there. We got 2 right there. And we also have a breather line that has to come off the airbox in order to completely free it up. And that is stuck on there pretty well. That usually comes off pretty easy, but this one, not so much. There we go. Yeah, the tank actually is fairly empty. So I'm going to tilt it a bit just to try to get out that last bit. The drain for the tank is actually on the bottom left here. So I'll prop it up a little bit here on the right. And I'm going to use actually the brake bleeder along with a vacuum pump to try to suck out that last bit that's in there. Yeah, we're not getting anything really except air. So, yeah, let's just mop up what's left. So just be careful when doing this. There is a fuel filter right on the bottom of the tank where the fuel exits the tank and goes into the fuel line. You don't want to break that off. And I've still got the generator tilted as well, so any fuel that's left should be in that corner. That one came out dry, so I think we might have it. We'll do one more just to make sure. And if that comes out dry, we'll try some fresh fuel. Try it out. Nice and dry. I'm not sure I showed you this up close, but that's what came out of the carburetor. Very, very dark fuel. Maybe a hint of water on the bottom. It's actually really hard to tell. And a little bit I was able to siphon out with the brake bleeder system. Actually has a bunch of water in it. I'm not sure how well that comes through, but I'd say half of that is water. You can actually see the line down there. So, yeah. Good thing we got that stuff out. The tank is now completely dry, so I think we can give this carb a try. See if it shows any signs of life. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say the carb most definitely needs to be cleaned. But maybe not. Let's try. All right, let's try this again. The eco throttle is still off. We're in the on position on both the cap and the ignition, and the choke is still on. Now, the system, it is completely dry. I mean, I did fill the tank, but the fuel pump is right there, and it does take a good 5 or 10 pulls to prime the system. So even if the carb's good, it's going to take at least that much to get everything primed up, and then, with any luck, this thing will start. Definitely not junk. This machine, I didn't even have to pull the carburetor off. It is now running. I was able to turn the choke off after about 20 or 30 seconds, and there was no surging. I throttled the engine down with the eco switch, and things ran just fine. Not to mention we're making power, so everything really is checking out on this machine. I think the biggest issue is just all the smoke that it was blowing out of the exhaust, and I'm sure that'll burn off. We just need to run this a bit longer. So I'm going to get this outside. First we'll button everything up, and once out there, we'll get it started again, put it under a moderate load, let it build up some heat, and hopefully that smoking stops. And you can see I've let this sit for a while, and the fuel, it's nice and clear and ethanol free at this point. So that can be poured off and reused. And if you look on the bottom, you can see the water that's separated out. So that little bit needs to be disposed of properly, but the rest of this is still good. I think I'm going to do this one a little bit differently than I just said. I don't have much time before it starts raining, so I think the revised plan is just to get this started. We will check the outputs, bring it to 750 watts, double check how things look, and then bring it up to 1500 watts and check the outputs. And then at that point, I'm going to back off the load to 750 watts. We'll let it run as long as it needs to for that smoke to clear up. It is definitely a pretty strong smell of oil, so I'm optimistic it's going to clear up. Potentially that's why it was thrown out. Anyway, the sine wave looks perfect. The THD is at 0.2%. So let's put a 750 watt load on and build some heat up in that exhaust. Well, the smoke show continues. Sine wave looks perfect, and we're still at 0.2% THD. Well, it's been about 4 minutes, and the smoke has gone from white to blue, which is not a good sign. The sine wave continues to look perfect, and the THD is only 0.3%. Yeah, we just passed the 15-minute mark. I don't see any smoke anymore. You know, I can still smell it though, so we'll give it, I'd say, at least another 15 minutes and check back. I'm not sure what to think of this one. This was thrown away for a reason, and the amount of smoke it was just blowing was a pretty good reason. If it kept doing that continuously, I could see why someone might throw this thing away. You know, I guess on the good news side, the smoke did clear after about 15 minutes, and a few minutes after that, kind of that burning oil smell went away. So, yeah, I'm not really sure what to think of that. You know, as far as the power output side, no issues. The voltage, the hertz were pretty much dead on no matter what load we were at. And the THD was probably the best that I've seen on one of these inverter generators. It was about 0.3% under close to full load. So you can't really beat that. Anyway, the carb has a bit of an issue. It's a little bit lean without a load. You know, I put the choke on partially and the engine smoothed out. So I think the pilot circuit does need to be gone through. So what I'm thinking is that, you know, I should let the engine cool down. We'll try to open up that pilot jet a bit, restart it, and see if we have a recurrence of that smoking issue. I was kind of really hoping to not have to clean the carburetor for once. And all things considered, this one's actually running the engine quite well. I'd say we're about 95% of the way there. But without a load, you know, I can really hear the servo working overtime to keep that engine speed steady, and it shouldn't be like that. So I'm thinking, having water in that carb certainly didn't do it any favors. And I've been thinking about the smoking issue a little more, and I think I've come up with a pretty good explanation as far as how this was thrown away, or kind of what led to this being thrown away. If you remember back in the beginning, we discovered the oil was overfilled. And it wasn't just a little bit overfilled. It had about 2 or 3 times the amount of oil that it should have. And if the engine was run with that much oil, even if the engine was healthy, it would have been too much oil. It would have pushed past the piston and rings. The piston would have pushed it up through into the exhaust. And of course, as long as the oil is overfilled, it's going to smoke like a freight train. So I think the owner most likely thought it had an engine problem and probably put it in a corner somewhere. And of course, then something happened to the fuel. Then it wouldn't start at all. And well, he probably figured the engine was just done at that point. So I'm fairly confident that the smoking issue is not going to come back when we restart this. At least that's my hope. It's a little tricky with all these lines here. You just got to remember kind of where they all went in order to route them correctly when reinstalling it. So, at this point, the only thing holding this carb in should be the servo. There is a wire going up into it. So if you get the carb off the posts, you can push the release right here. And that should free the cap. And that's the wire harness right there. So you just unplug it. And now we're free. I'm going to start just by getting the servo out of here. It's actually attached to this bracket, so we're going to get rid of the whole thing. Really, the big thing to keep in mind here is the spring that connects between the servo and the throttle plate. There is a little spring right there, and it's not really held in by anything. It's just sandwiched between the choke lever and the servo. So once you lift the servo off, that is free to come out. And you do want to take it out, but you don't want it to fly out because you will not find it again. And without it, things aren't going to run correct. So let's see if these screws come out. They do tend to strip real easy. So I'm going to try the impact on low. Usually that's all it takes to get those loose. Okay, let's do medium. There we go. And that does not fit. Let me swap that out. All right, so now we need to find the spring, hold this in place while you lift that servo off, like that. We'll put that out of the way. And this is what I'm talking about right here. This spring and this piece of plastic, they're just really held in with the spring at this point. And it just comes out like that. So at this point with the servo off, this is just a typical Honda carb. We have the pilot jet right there, the idle set screw, which is only in a little bit. It's actually the servo that idles it, so you don't have to worry so much about that. Anyway, let's get the bowl off, have a look inside. And that bolt is nice and clean, which is a good sign. That bolt's on there pretty good. Yeah, it's very clean in here. Which isn't a huge surprise. It was running pretty well. And I have fought this issue before in these. You know, they all kind of... I shouldn't say they all. I've had a fair share that kind of flutter like that at idle. So the main jet is down there. I think I need to swap out to a slightly smaller screwdriver. Emulsion tube looks pretty good. And lastly, we have the idle set screw and the pilot jet. Okay, and there we go. So I'm just going to run through everything, make sure it's clear. We'll soak this in the ultrasonic for about 10 minutes. And we should be good to go. Cleaned up pretty well, at least on the outside. The inside was always pretty clean. So, yeah, that slight surge, and I'm not even sure you can call it that, might still be there. I guess we'll find out in a minute. Yeah, that jet's not seating. So you got to make sure it seats or it's going to be a vacuum leak. There we go. Just a couple threads like that. And lastly, the servo. So we got to get the spring back and this plastic piece. Let's try it out. All right, let's give this a try. Got the eco throttle off. Everything else is ready to go. Now, it is going to take quite a few pulls to kind of prime the pump, fill the bowl with fuel. And then once it starts, we'll keep an eye on the exhaust. Hopefully it doesn't smoke. We will put a 750 watt load on it. And once I'm sure that the smoking issue is gone, we'll take the load off and just listen to the idle. You know, hopefully it's worked itself out. Well, the good news is there's no more smoke coming from this engine. So we don't have any engine issues. I think the only issue we had here was the fact that the prior owner just overfilled the crankcase. I'm sure it was smoking like a freight train every time he used it, and getting the water in the tank was the icing on the cake. You know, in the end, this didn't need a whole lot. The only investment I had in it was my time. Anyway, as far as the carb goes, you know, cleaning it didn't really improve it any. You know, that said, I'm kind of nitpicking a bit because this carb is running the engine pretty well. I was just trying to make it absolutely perfect. So in the end, is it worth cleaning again? Is it worth replacing? Probably not. So I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.